Hi everyone. I'm going to get into what's referred to as wedging. So wedging is what we refer to the process of taking any kind of air pocket out of the clay before using it to build with. Why is that important? Well, for several reasons. For one, if you have little bits of air pockets, little bubbles of air in your clay, it's going to be really hard to work with because it's going to form kinds of odd lumps, and which you're going to find as you're trying to center your clay on the wheel or trying to roll out a slab. Those little pockets of air are really going to interfere with what you're doing and kind of throw you off. Another reason is those pockets of air are going to trap humidity in those little pockets, and when it comes time to firing your work, those little humid pockets are going to turn to steam, and that steam is going to need to escape, and what's going to happen is that steam will escape and expand and blow up your piece and probably wreck your piece, and hopefully not someone else's that is sitting beside your piece in the kiln, but it likely will. So wedging is really important to sort of prepare your clay for building with, and also getting rid of all those little air pockets that you might find. Now, some of you may be familiar with the term kneading. So if you've done any kind of baking and you've worked with dough, kneading dough is something that you would do, but it's quite the opposite of wedging. Where kneading, you're actually putting air into the dough, whereas wedging, you're actually trying to take that air out. So if you're a baker and you've done some kneading, I'd like you to really try hard to forget everything you learned about kneading and do not apply that to clay, because it's going to be very different. So there's two kinds of predominant techniques of wedging, and I'm going to show you both of them. Now, one of them isn't better than the other. They're both different, and you're going to find out which one works better for you. So wedging is something that I do with every piece of clay before I start working with it. I don't only do it to get rid of those little air pockets that might find themselves in the clay from repurposing clay, or if I make a mistake on the wheel, I might want to use that clay over again and try again. But I use it to kind of homogenize the clay particles. So if clay is sitting around for a while, what happens is it could sometimes build up, I want to say like an outer crust, where the outside of the clay will be a different consistency than the inside of the clay. And if you just took that clay and you put it down on the wheel and you started throwing with it, you might find that as you start getting into it, that it might react differently than if it was all a homogeneous piece. So by wedging it, you're kind of getting that whole clay chunk that you're using the same consistency. And it actually prepares all those clay particles for being able to be more plastic and workable. Now, the clay that you buy in a box, the commercial clay, that clay is typically already what's referred to as vacuum pugged. So what they've done is they've put it through a machine, it's already wedged it mechanically, and it has a vacuum pump that has sucked all the air out of that clay as it's running itself through the machine. That's kind of what we're doing here, but in a more analog way. We're not doing it with a machine, we're doing it with our hands. So we're going to be flattening out that clay and working those air pockets out of the clay until it's all ready to be used. So to do that, I've got to cycle through the wedging process, I like to say about 100 times. So I'm going to get right into it. I'm going to start off with the spiral wedge technique, and I'm going to work it through 100 times, and that way I know that my clay is free of any kind of air pocket and will be ready to use. So here I go. I have my chunk of clay, and I'm going to put it on my wedging table. Now, the wedging table, you always want to be a good solid table that isn't going to move. And some people like to use canvas, but you want to use a surface that isn't going to stick to clay. So for example, stainless steel or some kind of a laminate material would not be very good to wedge, because if you have sort of a wetter clay, it's going to stick right to it and it's going to make that wedging process very difficult. What I like to use is this stuff here. It's a concrete board, or otherwise referred to as hardy board. And it's a porous kind of concrete board that you could buy at any hardware store. And I like to use that as my surface for the wedging table because it is porous, and so it's very easy to clean. And it also is fairly resilient. So if you have any kind of tools that you want to scrape any excess clay off of, it's going to come off without damaging the surface. So this stuff I find really great as a wedging table surface. I'm going to take my clay ball, I'm going to put it down on the wedging table, and I'm going to start working at it. So with this particular wedging technique, I'm going to be using my left hand, which is going to be doing a lot of pushing down and out. And then my right hand is going to be lifting that clay back up, and then I'm going to be pushing down and out. Okay, so wedging is one of the hardest things to wrap your head around as a beginner, but once you get the hang of it, it's going to become a lot easier. So you can see this is the spiral wedge technique. So essentially I have the clay sort of spiraling in here and then turning into a cone, and this edge of the spiral is sort of picture it sort of following this tail that's being created by me pushing my hand out and away. So my right hand is going to be bringing it up, okay, lining up this part here with this, and then my left hand is going to be pushing it down and creating a new wedge there. Okay? So when this is done quicker, most of the pressure that's going into this is with my left hand. Now don't push down like this, because you're going to find that you're just going to get a shape like that that's going to keep coming out. You want to try to keep this compressed and this edge here following this tail. So you can see, if I go slower, sort of that rocking motion that this hand is helping with. Sort of a rocking and twisting motion. That was spiral wedging. Some of you may have been thinking, oh my god, my wrists are going to break. This is way too hard on my wrists. Well, I just want to let you know that it does get easier, and wedging is one of those things that you are going to have a lot of practice at. And as you get better at it, your technique also refines so that you're not using so much your wrists, or you're finding a way to avoid that stress on your wrists so much and working more with different positions of your hands and still completing the same task. I'm going to demonstrate another wedging version that I feel like might be a lot easier for beginners, and it's not better or worse. The only reason why I personally prefer the spiral wedge system is that I find it a little bit easier when I'm working with larger amounts of clay. And I typically will try to wedge a larger amount of clay over a very small amount of clay because it's just easier for me. And I think you're going to find what the optimal amount of clay that you're going to wedge with, it works for you. And that's not to say that you can't wedge two small pieces throw them together and make one larger piece. That's what a lot of people will do. Or the opposite, wedge one big piece and cut it up into smaller pieces to make multiples of cups or bowls or whatever it is you're making. So the second technique is called, well, I call it the ram's head technique, and I'm not sure if that's just what I've been taught to call it, or maybe I made it up, I don't know. But that's what I'm going to refer to it, and you'll see in a minute why I call it that. And that technique is a little bit easier because it's using both hands in the same way. So for example, the spiral wedge technique, your left hand is doing something different than your right hand. Whereas this technique, both hands are doing the exact same thing and they're working more together in a symbiotic way. So I have my ball of clay and I'm going to get both my hands, and my hands are going to be cupping the sides of this clay. I'm going to be taking this part of my hand right here and here, and with that I'm going to be pressing down and forward. So I've sort of smushed that clay forward, and then with my fingers I'm lifting it up, getting my hands underneath it. I'm pressing, and then with the balls of my hands here, pressing it forward again. Fingers underneath, lifting it up, pressing it forward. So once again, I'm going to be doing this about 100 times. And if it helps, you could count it out. But I find 100 sort of the magic number to know for certain that you're not going to be encountering any air pockets in your clay. Okay, so as you can see here, this is why it's called the ram's head method, because it kind of looks like a ram's head. You have the spiral happening here, okay? You have this sort of flattened area, which is being smushed along the table and folding here. And this is actually the active part where the clay is pushing against itself and squeezing any air pockets in. Now, it's really important to know that I'm not pressing down straight like that. If I were to be pressing down straight, what would happen was this clay would just keep spreading out. So I'm really making an effort to try to contain the clay on the sides like this, and just using the ball part of my hand, the thick part below my thumb, to do the pressing. Okay? Both hands are working simultaneously, making sure to contain. And as I get more towards the end of that 100-time repetition, I'm going to sort of ease off on how much pressure I put down, roll it into itself, and slap it into a ball. Now my clay is ready to be used on the wheel, or however I'd like to be using it.